learning. How does learning occur? Well, there's this thing called the learning pyramid. First of all, what you need to know is that we retain about 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we see and hear, 70% of what we discuss, and 90% of what we teach. So what is the best way to learn? Well, learning can be divided into passive learning and active learning. Passive learning consists of lectures or PowerPoints or just being in class and listening to something. Now that's passive learning, comes in one ear, goes out the other ear. And PowerPoints tend to be kind of boring and dry, and you tend to zone out. Active learning, on the other hand, is you actively doing something. So you're discovering some sort of concept, you're processing it, and then you're applying it. First of all, you're reading a textbook. That's at the top of the pyramid is reading. You read a textbook, you retain about 10%. Now, let's say you're sitting in a lecture and you're listening. You're going to retain about 20% of what you're hearing. You're watching a movie. You're going to retain about 30% of what you're seeing. Now, if you combine what you're seeing and you're hearing, you're going to retain about 50% of that content. Now, knowing 50% of, let's say, a lecture is actually not that great. I mean, you're not going to pass an exam if you had an exam on that certain topic. Now, how do you enhance? How do you make your learning better? What do you do in order to make sure that what you're listening to and hearing and trying to understand, and how do you make sure that you retain that information? So in order to make sure that you retain more than 50% of the information that is presented to you, what do you have to do is you have to be able to not only process the information, be able to apply it. So sit in a group, start discussing the topic that you've been talking about. For instance, if you're talking about immunology and the innate and adaptive immune system, just talk it through. What was the lecture about? What did you learn? That helps you be able to create a visual aid and a memory aid that'll help you understand what you just listened to or what you were taught. Lastly, the best way to retain that information is to be able to teach it, to be able to talk through a concept. That is the best way to retain that. So you are going to be able to retain 90% of that content if you're able to teach it to someone else, if you're able to explain it to someone else. So in the next video, I'm going to be discussing about a specific way of how I learn in medical school, how I am able to pass my classes, and not just pass, but actually do exceptionally well in my classes by utilizing this learning pyramid. Thank you for tuning in. Please tune in for more great videos.